Welcome to FT Stories. This is a space for sharing emotional stories, meaningful lessons, and unforgettable experiences. It's a place for us to listen, reflect, and draw values for ourselves from real stories that others have experienced today. I'm going to tell you a special story about Emma, a young girl with simple dreams who accidentally found herself in a heartbreaking situation. Let's dive into Emma's journey, one line of confidence at a time. Hello everyone, I'm Emma. I'm 20 years old and this year has been quite the journey. I'm a second-year student at a university in BC. I'm going to tell you a story about an experience that I'll never forget. I want to share it so that my peers can learn from it. Over a year ago, I decided to work part-time to earn extra income, support my family, and gain experience. I signed up for some groups on social networks looking for tutoring jobs, because I was quite good at literature. I chose to register to teach this subject. Luckily, after a short time, I received a message from a man who said he was looking for a tutor for his son. I quickly texted him to discuss more and suggested trying to teach a few sessions. He would accept to teach long-term. He happily agreed and told me to come to his house on the weekend. His house is also near where I live. When I arrived, my first impression was that his house was quite big, very spacious, and clean. He introduced himself as his son. I got a message from a guy who said he was looking for a tutor for his son. I quickly texted him to discuss more and suggested trying to teach a few sessions. If it was okay, he would accept to teach long-term. He was happy about it and told me to come to his house on the weekend, specifically on Saturday. His house is also near where I live. When I arrived, my first impression was that his house was quite big, very spacious, and clean. He introduced himself as his son. He was in middle school and didn't like studying literature, so he needed someone with experience and patience to tutor him. After the first lesson, I realized that my child was quite difficult to teach in literature. Teaching him was not easy. Every time I started to teach, he often lost focus, sometimes even yawning while listening. But the good thing was that he was obedient and didn't argue. As long as I gently encouraged him or explained more clearly, he would try to complete the exercises. There were days when I had to. I tried to make the lessons more interesting for him by telling more stories related to the topic or letting him play vocabulary games. Gradually, he started to cooperate, and I felt less stressed. His father was very supportive during the lessons. He often stopped by my room and asked if I needed a break. On days when I taught late, he also asked if I was hungry. There were fruits and food in the kitchen, so he offered me some. He'd bring me water and say, "Don't let yourself get thirsty." It was a nice gesture, and it made me feel he appreciated my work. It gave me more motivation to do well as a tutor. He works in the business field, often has to work overtime or meet customers, so there are days when he comes home very late or doesn't come home at all. On those days, the maid will open the door for me to teach. Sometimes he also sits down and he chats with me about his divorce and raising a child on his own. He says it's really stressful, and it's tough working and taking care of a child alone. He also says he wants to find a woman who understands and can accompany him in life. Gradually, I felt he was a mature, steady man who was very devoted to his family. He not only spoke well, but also made me feel safe. At first, I thought he was a good boss. But over time, I began to feel something. One time after teaching, he went to meet a client and came home drunk. He looked very tired, like his body was burning from drinking too much. I helped him up to his room to rest, and he held my hand and said, "Can you stay with me? I'm so tired. I need someone to take care of me." I felt sorry for him at the time. I thought about the time we spent together and how he cared for and treated me. Well, maybe I had fallen for him, so I didn't refuse that offer that night. He pulled me back and hugged me. I was a little startled, but I didn't resist because I already had feelings for him. After that, he locked the door, and that's when it happened. That was the first time I felt like we were really close. There was no more distance between us from that day on. Our relationship gradually changed. We were not just tutors and parents, but I felt like we were. He was always there for me financially. He often gave me extra money, sometimes up to $1,000. He said, "Emma, you've worked hard. Just consider it as my compensation. Buy whatever you want." He also said that when with him, you don't need to think too much. Just focus on raising your children. I was really touched when I heard those words. I thought, maybe this is the man I can rely on in the future. I used to dream that one day he might propose and I'd become the woman of the family. But life isn't like a dream. Everything was going well until one fateful evening. I'd just finished teaching ing and was reviewing lessons for his son when the doorbell rang. The child ran to open the door and saw who was standing outside. He shouted, "Mom." I was surprised and confused because he'd always told me he was divorced. I never thought I'd meet the child's mother in this situation. The woman walked into the house with a determined look on her face and cold eyes. She looked straight at me without saying hello and immediately asked, "Are you a tutor?" I replied, "Yes, that's right, I'm a tutor for children." Her lips curled into a sneer, and her gaze became even more unpleasant. "I know everything about you and my husband being together. I'll be frank, he and I are not divorced. You're still young. Focus on studying and you're young. And you're going to live a proper life. Don't get involved in other people's family matters like that. Do you want to be a third party and destroy this family?" I was petrified. Everything happened so suddenly that I didn't know what to say. After a few seconds of regaining my composure, I tried to explain. "Sister, I didn't know he told me he was divorced. If I had known he had a family, I would never have." She interrupted me. Her tone was firm. "I don't need to explain. I know my husband's personality too well. This isn't the first time he's done this. I work far away and I'm not home. He often takes advantage of that to deceive gullible girls like you. He always uses this trick, saying he's divorced and single, to seduce you. Do you think you're special? You're just one of the many girls he's deceived. I don't blame you. I'd advise you to stay awake and stop before things get worse." Hearing these words, I was speechless. All the trust and affection I had placed in him had now completely vanished. I didn't know what to say, so I just bowed my head and remained silent. But she didn't stop continuing to speak. "I'll pay you enough for this month's salary, but from today on, you don't need to come to this house anymore." I guess I should have kept my mouth shut. I bowed my head and started to cry. I walked out of the house, feeling confused and hurt. I needed to talk to him, so I called him as soon as I left. He picked up the phone, but I could tell he was upset. He said my wife was back and that I was a bad husband. I wasn't. You know, he said he'd say something, but he just replied, "I know. Wait for me to come back." Then he hung up. Less than 10 minutes later, he turned up at home. I really hoped he'd explain, that he'd stand up for me, but what happened hit me like a rock. He didn't defend me. He turned to my wife and said, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Can we get back together?" I stood there completely broken, the man I once trusted and loved. He'd turned his back on me without saying a word. No explanation, no protection. He was only interested in making peace with his wife. I was left with all this pain that had piled up. I couldn't bear it any longer, so I rushed out of the house, tears streaming down my face. On the way home, my heart was filled with pain and humiliation. Not only did I lose faith in him, but I also felt like I'd become a bad person in the eyes of others. I had absolutely no idea what to do. When I got home, I was so upset I cried all the way through. I felt like my whole world had collapsed. All the trust, hope, and affection I had for him had disappeared. Not only did I feel pain from being deceived, but I also felt humiliated for becoming the third person without knowing it. I went to my best friend to try to find some comfort. My friend listened and said, "I've heard of this guy, you've been fooled, Emma. You're not the only one." My friend was also deceived. He tricked me. He said he was divorced, but he still lived with his wife. He also has a habit of seducing young girls, especially students like you. I heard that someone was even pregnant by him and had to have an abortion. I was stunned. It turned out that I was just one of many people he took advantage of. It turned out that his sweet promises and thoughtful gestures were just an act. He put them on to trick me. I felt both miserable and I was ashamed. I couldn't believe that I had fallen into such a trap so easily. My friend continued, "You're lucky you're not pregnant. Otherwise things would have been worse. Consider this a lesson to learn from. Focus on your studies. Don't let things like this make you suffer anymore." I should have done more research into this relationship from the beginning. I put my trust in someone I didn't really understand. I was taken in by sweet promises and fake gestures of care. I realized that my own innocence and lack of experience made me vulnerable to being taken advantage of. After the story ended, I spent a whole day crying. I was upset not only because of the betrayal, but also because of the shame and self-blame. I wondered why I let things go so far and why I wasn't more careful. I should have been more aware of the warning signs, but in the end I realized that dwelling on pain and regret won't change what happened. I need to turn this story into a valuable lesson, not only for myself, but also to warn others. I decided to share my story online, especially in groups for tutors and young students. I wrote very clearly and in detail about how he approached me, the lies about my marital status, and how he took advantage of my feelings. I didn't hesitate to tell the truth, because I knew that I wanted to share my story so that other girls wouldn't have to go through the same thing. Hopefully, my sharing will help girls be more vigilant and careful in both their work and personal lives. Through this story, I learned some profound lessons for myself. First of all, I realized that work is work, love is love. Never let these two things get mixed up, especially when you don't understand the other person. No matter how trustworthy the other person seems or how sweet their words are, you need to keep your distance. It's important to have clear boundaries in life. Things aren't always as rosy as we'd like them to be, so we need to be aware and protect ourselves. Secondly, I've learned that trust should not be placed too easily. It's better to find out carefully before placing trust in anyone. Don't just listen to what others say, but look at their actions. Find out what is really behind the appearance. The truth is often not easy to recognize, but if I were more alert, I could have avoided mistakes. Finally, I've realized that I should not depend on anyone, especially materially. I realized that I needed to be more self-sufficient. Relying on others makes you weak and vulnerable. Independence and self-reliance are the only way to avoid being hurt by people who don't deserve it. After this experience, I decided to make some changes. I focused on studying and working to build a future based on my own abilities. I started to love and respect myself more, and I learned from my mistakes. I've learned that I can only face the challenges in life head-on when I'm strong and independent. Looking back, I want to send a message to young girls: don't let sweet words and material gifts cloud your mind. There's nothing more important in life than independence and self-reliance. What you create with your own hands and efforts will be more sustainable and valuable than anything that is given easily. Be alert, love yourself, and don't let anyone take advantage of you. There will always be good and bad people in this world. How you protect yourself will determine whether you can overcome difficulties. Live a strong, free life and don't let anyone hurt you. Thank you for listening to Emma's story. Hopefully, you can learn meaningful lessons from it, especially about how to love and protect yourself in life. Sometimes mistakes will bring us valuable lessons, helping us grow and become stronger. Emma chose to stand up after falling. I hope you found this story interesting and that it helped you to think about relationships in a new way. If you liked it, please click the like button to show your support. If you want to see more stories like this, click follow channel to get updates. Every like and follow is a great source of motivation for Emma to keep sharing more stories. That's the end of today's story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next videos. Wishing you all happiness, strength, and a meaningful life.